Hi everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands where I am today and paying my respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue to have strong spiritual and cultural connections to country. I also want to thank and acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Advisory Group that are working with me on my fellowship. I'm a non-Indigenous woman born and raised here on Jagera and Turrbal land, and I want to thank and acknowledge the advisory group's support and guidance while I'm undertaking this fellowship. I'd like to first share a story of one of the students who I've interviewed. So Sarah is an Aboriginal student studying science at university. When she was in grade 10, Sarah attended an interstate 5-day outreach camp at a university with 25 other Indigenous school students. This was her first time out of her home state. She knew she wanted to attend university, but that would make her the first in her family to do so, and she didn't know if she could afford it. The camp was a taste of what it's like to attend university. She did fun workshops across different disciplinary areas, experienced a residential college, visited the Indigenous Centre on campus, and found out about the financial and social support that was available for her. These were all great experiences. What made the greatest impact for Sarah was the people that she met. When I interviewed Sarah for this project, she said the best aspect was meeting other Indigenous school students with dreams and goals like hers to attend university. She described it as being like a family. She was also really inspired by the Indigenous university students who were mentors and ambassadors on the camp, many of whom had attended a similar or the same camp while they were at school. The camp demonstrated to Sarah that going to university could be a reality, not just a dream. She applied for that university and she's now a student there. She keeps in touch with the students she met on that grade 10 camp and also those she met on a second camp she attended in grade 12. She's also now a student ambassador on that camp. Sarah's story is an example of what works in outreach programs for Indigenous students. So most universities run camps for Indigenous school students to introduce them to university. So certainly the case for these initiatives is strong, as there's much evidence around the barriers that Indigenous school students face in entering into university. And the programs have many similarities. They're usually 3 to 5 days on-campus experiences where students get to do lots of different activities, and is usually run by Indigenous and non-Indigenous outreach staff and Indigenous student mentors as well. So as Sarah's story attests, these camps work for some students, but we don't really understand how or why. And so this is what my research fellowship is trying to find out. And my drive to do this is because I want to understand what works. And this is echoing lots of previous research by Indigenous scholars talking about the importance of focusing on success. As Bronwyn Fredericks notes, what constitutes success remains an important question that must be addressed from the different perspectives of the Indigenous student, the institution, the government, and the broader Indigenous community. For example, if an Indigenous student attends a camp but then goes on to attend a different university, this shouldn't necessarily be considered a failure because the focus is on this student and their individual pathway into university. So today I want to focus on 3 success factors of outreach camps for Indigenous students and 3 suggested strategies to improve outreach camps for Indigenous students. So the number 1 success factor is connections. So the connections and networks that students make while attending the camps. So family is a word that came up many times in interviews with students. Students talk about the importance of meeting like-minded Indigenous students from diverse places on the camps, and they realise that they're not alone in their experiences and their goals. They report on keeping in touch with this network afterwards, and many continue to friendships on campus. One student said, "Uni is such a white space," which highlights just how important these networks and friendships are. This is supported extensively in the literature on Indigenous students and their transition into university. The number 2 success factor is the ambassadors or mentors. So for the Indigenous school students, meeting Indigenous university students who are already on campus is a really important factor. Students talk about how inspiring it is to meet them and the realisation that university study is possible and achievable. And ambassadors are an important part of demystifying university and demonstrating how, for Indigenous students, they can navigate, survive and thrive at university. And the third success factor is the experiences. So experiencing practical activities in specific disciplinary areas balanced with cultural activities. Students speak with excitement about getting the opportunity to participate in hands-on physics activities or visiting labs or other exciting hands-on activities, but equally important is cultural activities such as yarning circles around cultural identity. So I'll now talk about 3 suggested strategies to improve outreach camps. So the number 1 suggested strategy is more post-camp engagement. So students talked about how they would like further follow-up from outreach staff after attending the camp. And also staff talked about this, that this was something that could be done better. So this could be done through phone calls, further phone calls to the student after attending the camp, or perhaps bringing the group back together to either face-to-face or online to ensure that that relationship and that connection is continued. And this would allow for a further focus on the whole of student life cycle through school into university and beyond. So the number 2 suggested strategy for improving outreach camps is building further Indigenous perspectives into the curriculum. This is something that both staff and students talked about could be done further. And certainly some camps do include Indigenous perspectives on that disciplinary area. But this could be further strengthened with collaboration between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander centres at the university and outreach staff to ensure that Indigenous perspectives are included in the curriculum. And the number 3 suggested strategy for improving outreach camps is further collaboration between outreach staff and researchers. So many of the staff talked about they would like to further collaborate with researchers to evaluate their programs or learn more about how to evaluate their programs. So part of my fellowship is developing some resources that are for outreach staff, so tips on evaluation as well as Indigenous perspectives on how to evaluate programs. Certainly evaluation in Indigenous higher education is more and more important, especially in this socially distanced world where universities are navigating and trying to respond and innovate in this socially distanced world. So many students like Sarah that I talked about at the beginning have attended multiple camps or returned multiple times to the same camp. And certainly camps are an important part of a suite of outreach activities that can help lead Indigenous students in a pathway onto university. And I hope my fellowship findings can further strengthen evaluation of Indigenous specific outreach programs and therefore strengthen those pathways for Indigenous students into university.